Hola. I want to apologize ahead of time. My Spanish is muy mal. In fact, it's so bad I'm going to speak in English. So hi, my name's Joe. I'm going to came here to talk tonight about couples counseling for software development. Just a quick gauge of the room. How many folks here are developers that do programming? Awesome. We got a few here, more over here. Awesome. Okay, so quite a bit. How many folks here work in sales, marketing, business? Okay, more business people. It seems like we're always outnumbered, doesn't it? I'm a weirdo here. I actually have a business degree, but I went into programming. So I've kind of had one foot in both of those worlds for a long time now. And this topic that I'm going to talk about, developers, how many of you that are developers have gotten into an argument with the business people about what you are going to develop and how? Only a few? Yeah. Wow, you guys must get along a lot better than we do in the States. How many business people have been very confused about what their software developers are telling them when they ask them to do something? Yes, that's more common. All right, I need a next slide. How do I do next slide? I'll run over and do that. So a little bit about me. I've been an early employee at 3 startups that range from little un poquito tiny ones all the way up to much bigger ones. I've put a little bit of money into a few of my friends' startups. I've advised quite a few venture startups, including Lyft and Uber. And I've actually done this 3 times myself, where I've gone out and raised funding from venture capitalists in the Bay Area. 2 of those companies are gone and dead, but Sprintly, about a year ago, I bought back from the investors, and I now run that independently myself. The first thing that I want to talk about, how many here are actually working at a startup and are working on a new product, something that's brand new? Awesome. Okay. One of the things that I really like about this, because it's so difficult, when you're in those early stages and you're like, I want to build something. Well, the problem is when you start to build that thing, there's about 1 million different variations of that thing that you could build. You don't know how to build it. You don't necessarily know how to design it. You don't know which features to put into it. Kevin Systrom, he was the founder of Instagram, and he had this really great quote, which is, the best products in the world start out as features. And the message that I want everyone to take from this is pick one thing in those early days. Pick one feature and do that feature really, really well. So if you think about Instagram in the early days, well, even now, you take a picture and you post it to your friends. That kernel has stayed true throughout, even as they added things like stories and video, collages, etc. So we talked a little bit about this earlier, but I consider the makers versus the managers to be kind of warring factions within the business. Because at the end of the day, the business people are responsible for making money. That's their job. They're the ones that connect the product to the market. They're the ones that are out there talking to people, are understanding the problem. And solving problems is where market value comes from effectively. Okay? Reducing those frictions and solving problems. Meanwhile, the developers are the ones that are telling you how quickly you can solve that problem and how best you can solve that problem. And inevitably, there's tension that rises from this, right? So to put that into a different context, if you are somebody that has a tremendous amount of wealth and you would love to have something built or created, you might say, I'd like a 7,000-story skyscraper. Well, the engineers are going to come in and be like, you can't do that. And here's all the reasons why you can't do that. And that tension is what I'm talking about between these warring factions. The first thing that I'd like both sides to think about, this is actually a very old slide, but it's now very topical, unfortunately. The first thing I want to say to both sides of this equation is both of you need to kind of check your egos at the door. The business people know things that us software developers are just not good at. Like, they're the reason that they're out talking. Like, I'm not good at talking to people, despite me being up here talking to people. So I have other people go out and talk to them, and I don't know marketing, so I have them go out and do it. On the other side of the equation, you've hired these developers because they're experts, right? They're good at what they do. So what's best is if both sides check their ego at the door and recognize that both sides are bringing value to the table. And I really want to drive this home. Everyone in your company, by the way, y'all can ignore everything I say, but the important points are in bold, big, yellow writing. So you can ignore everything else. Everyone in your company is capable of having a good idea. The Nike logo was designed by an intern, okay? So this is another thing where you need to be listening to everybody in the company, because solving difficult problems is not a one-man show. All right, this is the manager section. Next slide. This is a pretty typical triangle paradox, okay? And what this means is you can have things done quickly, correctly, or cheaply. Now you get to pick two. You can only have two of those things at any given time. So if you are a manager and you want something created, you need to optimize for what your particular problem is, okay? So in the early stages, I would optimize for quickly and cheaply. When you're trying to validate your ideas in the market in those early days, I wouldn't be spending a ton of money on getting the best developers, getting the best designers, getting the best marketing people. You need to be iterating very quickly on solving the problem that is going to provide value to your customers. So I've seen people launch, successful companies on nothing more than a WordPress install or, very, very simple kind of things like that. So that's something to keep in mind for the managers. Next. The other way to say this is actually an old Italian proverb, which is you can't have your wine cask full and your significant other drunk, which is the version of you can't have your cake and eat it too. So that is something to keep in mind as you're building those initial products out. You can't do everything. You can't have everything that you want in those early days. And really that's where it's critical to identify what things you can provide quickly that provide the most value. Another way to think about that is the 80-20 rule, which is what is the 20% of work you can do that will yield 80% of the kind of value. This is another great quote that I really love from Joy Ito, which is, if you want to increase innovation, lower the cost of failure. And what I mean by that is you want to shrink feedback loops. You want to work with your developers in a way, your makers in general, developers, designers, etc. You want to work with them in a way that basically you have a very rapid loop between what you're doing and what the market is telling you that you're doing wrong or correct. And there's a whole host of ways that you can do that, which I'm going to talk about. The first one is allow engineers to invest in automation and testing. And you're like, what does that have to do with anything? The reason for this is because testing, for instance, writing unit tests, writing integration tests, etc., allow computers to look for bugs for you, okay, in an automated way. So what this helps doing is, back in the day, back when I started programming, which was, I won't talk about how long ago it was, but it was a long time ago, and we had humans that did this, and they wrote down step by step, go to the checkout page, enter this, click this button, etc., right? And they did that because every time I add a line of code, I'm more than likely going to introduce a bug somewhere in the system. And the problem is that as your software gets more mature and as you spend more time developing on it and as more people put their hands in the cookie jar, you're going to be in a position where basically you're touching one piece of the code and the other piece of the code breaks. And if you have good test coverage, you'll know that immediately. You'll know that as soon as you push your code. If you don't have good test coverage and you don't invest in automation, that means you then need to invest in humans to sit around and click on things. And if you don't do that, you're going to have probably a very buggy system. So why iterating on your product is all about shortening those feedback loops. The other thing is continuous deployment. This is around the automation bit. Basically, you want to get your code out there as fast as possible. So testing allows you to get software out safely and quickly, and continuous integration and automation allows you to deploy that into production and into your customers' hands as fast as possible. The company I work at today, we've got about 15 to 20 developers, and they deploy anywhere between 2 to 3 times a day up to a couple dozen times a day. The reason that, again, that you want to do that is the sooner you can get that code out there, the sooner customers can start playing with it, and the sooner the customers can start telling you what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. The other thing, and this is something more for the developers, I'm throwing this out there, one of the things that's really great about automated testing is it allows for much more aggressive refactoring. Okay, so and I'll translate that for the business folks. What that means is you develop version 1 and you take it out to the market, and the market says, half of this is crap. I need you to completely redo this half. Okay, you go back to your developers and you say, hey, half of this is crap. I need to redo it in this manner. That is very likely going to require some invasive surgery on your code. And if you have good test coverage around the bits that are still needed, you know with a certain degree of certainty that when you're making those changes and doing that invasive surgery, that you're not killing the patient while you're doing those things. All right, now for the makers, we need to make fun of you a little bit as well. I love this quote so much. You should get a computer science degree. It's the only degree that automatically makes you an expert in politics, finance, religion, and economics. Next one. But I want to say this. Developers, you're not an expert in sales, marketing, business development. These are not our areas of expertise. There's a reason why we sit at the terminal for 10 to 12 hours a day coding, and it's not because we're good necessarily with people or understanding or communicating with them. Here's a quick sample of non-product to-dos, non-technical product to-dos. This comes from literally from SimpleGeo's product launch checklist sheet. You need to do financial model. You need to do customer development, copywriting, making a plan for launch, public relations. You need to do support, community development, sales training, managing beta customer. I mean, the list goes on, right? And these are not things that us developers are generally comfortable with doing. Wait. These slides will be available too online. We'll make sure that they're out. Maybe we can bribe somebody to translate them as well. So just to give you an idea of how robust the business side of the operations are, we had 41 non-engineering items on that list. When we launched a new product or a new feature at SimpleGeo, there were 41 things that the business folks needed to do. There were 7 that the developers needed to do. So there's a lot of work, a lot more work that goes into it. I think a lot of developers think, oh, if I build it, they will come. And pretty much every business person on the planet knows that if you build it, they won't come unless you tell them about it. I also bring this up. This is Hudson. These days it's known as Jenkins. It's a continuous integration product. And I bring this one up as well as the next slide. Just take it in, the beauty. Is it going? Has it decided to stop? But I bring this up to make a point, which is that developers, we are not designers. Developers designed this, and it's terrible. This should be the last slide. There was still more scroll bar. Did our internets go away? This is the form for Bugzilla. I think there's about 7,000 inputs on that page. None of them make any sense. The next one down is Nagios, which is a monitoring system. Also looks completely terrible. I'm pretty sure my 6-year-old cousin could make a better design than that. And like I said, you're not a designer. Seriously, look at that shit. It's terrible. Next one. The other thing too that I really want to drive home is very, very rarely as a developer will you be the target customer. Very rarely. And I put this up here, really nobody cares about keyboard shortcuts, and I want to tell you a story when I worked at Digg. When I worked at Digg, I worked with arguably one of the best designers, definitely the best designer I've ever worked with. He designed the Firefox logo. His name is Daniel Burka. Phenomenal designer. And I was sitting in a meeting wherein we were redesigning the Digg comments section. And Steve, a guy named Steve, who was a developer's developer through and through. Like, he didn't care anything about the code or anything about the product necessarily. He cared everything about the bits and the bytes and the code. And he literally got into a shouting match with Burka about wanting to have keyboard shortcuts. And he swore up and down, if you don't add keyboard shortcuts, nobody is going to use Digg comments. So again, I bring this up, we're not the target customer, and the reason that I'm bringing this up is because the people who are very likely both your target customers and know your target customers best are the ones that are wearing the pleated slacks and have the tie and they go have the power lunches, the business people. They're the ones that understand that target customer. And what that means is they're going to come to you one day and they're going to ask you for a feature, and you're going to say something like this: that's really stupid, I would never use that. It probably is really stupid for a developer from their point of view, but at the end of the day, very likely a paying customer said, hey, I want this stupid feature. And sometimes it's not our place to necessarily ask why or whatever. It's our job to make it happen. One of the things I like to tell my developers on this particular topic, the ones that I work for, is as a developer, your job is not to say no. It's to figure out how to say yes. That's your job. So at the end of the day, sometimes customers just want CSV export. Sometimes they just want to hit a button and have an email shoot off, and that is not interesting technology to make. Trust me on that. I've written the CSV export roughly 4,000 times. It's very boring work. But at the end of the day, there are a whole lot of people that just want to import some stuff into Excel. This one is also really important, I think, for everybody, which is focus on the problem. If you're only excited about the solution, you'll lose interest when your solution doesn't fix the problem. And what I mean by that is you are creating these products to solve a problem, right? And us developers and technologists can sometimes get bogged down in the details of the technology and the implementation details, right? Like, if they're, like, for instance, again, going back to Instagram, not a very technically interesting product at the beginning. It was literally taking a picture and uploading it probably to S3. But they were looking to solve a particular problem. So again, if you are building a product and you come up with the most technologically sophisticated, elegant solution, you might find out that all they really wanted was a CSV export. All right, some notes on delivering product. Next one. What's CSV? CSV is the comma-separated values format. That is a text file format that you can import directly into Excel. Every online bank on the planet allows you to download a CSV of, like, your, yeah, sorry.
For those people who don't have bank.
The first thing I want to say about product is I have this little timeline up here. So you probably have a vision of what your product is going to look like at some point, and your brain is like right here. The problem is that if you go all the way back here, this is when you first had the idea. This is maybe when you got some funding or decided to do something really crazy like quit your job and try it. And then, like, here's version 1.0, right? The problem is your brain's way out here, right? This will be your number one problem as you take a product to market and continue to iterate on that product. I bet if you talk to somebody if you even talk to somebody at Google or Facebook, these are enormous established companies with thousands of employees and dozens of products. And I guarantee if you go to the heads of either of those two companies and say, are you finished yet? No, not even close. They're probably not even, Zuck's probably not even 30% through what his original plans and ideas were. Next slide. If you're not embarrassed when you ship your first version, you waited too long. This is something that I think both makers and managers get bogged down in. I just need one more feature and then we can launch. I just need to write 5 more tests and then we can launch. No, just shove that bird out the nest and start getting that feedback from your customers. The sooner you can get your customers to tell you what you're doing right or wrong, the better. That should be the goal and the focus of doing product work. The other thing I want to make a point on is product is transfer warfare. This is not blitzkrieg style of work here. You are going to take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 4 steps forward, 10 steps back, 3 steps forward, etc., etc. Because what's going to happen is, this is just common iteration stuff, right? So prepare yourself for throwing a few things against the wall and having them not stick. And for your successes, this always drives me insane, by the way. You'll launch a new feature, and the customers have been asking for it, they're excited about it, and then the feedback you get is, yeah, that's great, now we need all this other stuff. And that is something to kind of, that can be very, that can be a struggle. And because of that, and because of a couple of the other things I've talked, you need to be militant in your minimally viable product. This goes back to the first quote that I had, which is that every good product starts out as a feature. Militant. It's cut. Focus on the one problem that your customers need solved right now. Approaching product. This is basically my cycle that I go through. Focus on a single use case that addresses the problem. Start with minimal core set of features. And then the good old iteration cycle. Release and listen to your users. Question your initial assumptions based on the feedback. Remember that you are very likely not the target customer. Rinse and repeat. Iterating on your product. Great idea. This is, by the way, this is something that, this is basically how it was done at Digg. Have a great idea, wireframe and balsamic or whatever, designer gets a static mock-up, and then the static mock-up is thrown over the wall to the engineering to implement. However, I have some problems with this, obviously. It turns out that static mock-ups are, in fact, static. Engineers implement it only to find out that the UX is terrible. I've had this happen dozens of times. Other engineers have probably had this happen too, where they hand you static mock-ups, you implement it, and then they start using it and they're like, this is awful. This is totally awful. Yep. And then the other one too is, I have a funny story about this. They'll throw something over the wall and the engineers are like, well, I'd like a unicorn, but you're not getting this feature. I had a feature one time, I got a static mock-up, again from Daniel Burko, this is at Digg, and 90% of the design was kind of like a small iteration over some feature that we had, nothing big. But then there was this like little small 300 by 50 pixel area on the page that had something that I knew we couldn't deliver. We couldn't deliver at our scale. And I was like, hey Daniel, I either need like budget for 500 machines to do this one little feature, or we're gonna have to cut it. And he turns to me and he goes, would it be easier if I made it purple? No. So this is the point I want everybody to take away from that. Involve engineering in the product design process. And the reason for that is, next slide. Next slide. Wait, go back. What happened to that slide? Did it just disappear? Oh, I think it disappeared. All right, go down, down, down. All right. So how do I like to iterate on product now? A company I invested in that is unfortunately no longer around is called Yard Sale, and the guy that ran it, Ryan Mickle, had a completely different approach to designing product, which was he had a great idea, he would wireframe, and then he would engage engineering to build a vanilla prototype using canned user interface libraries. So iOS, Android, we now have React Native, we have Bootstrap, we have a ridiculous amount of canned UI available to us. They're great libraries written by great companies and they're free, right? So what he did is he's like, screw it, everybody knows iOS UI, everybody knows Android UI, we'll just use that for now. And what he did is he focused on, he really focused on the user experience. And what he tried to do was solve the problem first and then make it look pretty, if that makes sense. I just wanted that picture to be in there. So why is this better? Designer's time is not lost on features that aren't shippable. Timelines aren't disrupted by unforeseen technical hurdles, because we're actually coding the interface as we're designing it. And last but most importantly, we avoid pissing off the engineers. Because to be totally honest, it's demoralizing to be handed something that you know you can't build. There's nothing I want more to do as a developer than to ship code, and to ship viable code, and to make users happy. So involving engineers sooner in the process, they're the ones that know your data model, they're the ones that know what data is lurking where, and they know what's technically feasible. All right, on to process interrupts. Next slide. Products are either, this is my personal philosophy, and it goes back to that triangle paradox that we talked about earlier. Products are either date-driven, which for the business folks in the room, that means you've lined up some big partnership. That big partner is launching on some certain date, and they need you to launch alongside them. Okay, in that case, you'll cut features, you'll do whatever you can to make that date. On the other side of the coin is your feature-driven, which is this product is worthless unless it does X. And in that case, what will happen is you'll constantly be pushing that date out because X isn't done yet. Next. This is something that I like to call non-blocking development, which is I'm not a big believer in sprints, milestones, or dates being tracked by engineering. The problem, the reason again for this is we're either date-driven and we know what we need to get done by a certain date, or we're feature-driven and we know what needs to be done and it's just going to get done when it gets done. I still like to do scoring of items and velocity. That's mostly for internal tracking. Each developer works on an item to completion in a feature branch, which basically means that it's isolated in a separate part of the code base. Pull request via GitHub, Bitbucket, whatever your thing is, for review. And then we go back to automation, which is features are deployed immediately upon approval via continuous deployment. And the reason that we can do things like this, where you basically write some code, issue it for review, and then let the robots do the rest, is because as business folks, we have allowed the developers to invest in automation and testing. It allows us to make changes to our code with confidence and ship those to production quickly. There are times when I'll get a bug report at Sprintly and I will have something live on the website, reviewed, tested, and working in less than an hour. And there is nothing customers love more than submitting a support request, having someone respond to it, and having a fix out in less than a few hours. And the way that you get there is through investing in automation and testing. Why is this better, in my opinion? It shares the reactive qualities of Kanban, which means that you're not in this kind of rigid sprint format where, oh, I got to get everything done by the end of the week, and it needs to be these things, and it can't be anything else. The velocity metrics allow you to do reasonable capacity planning, and the features ship in real time. And that is something that I really hope that the business folks in the business side of this room takes away, which is that if you invest in testing and automation, you don't have to wait for releases. The code goes out when it's done, and the code goes out independently of other things. Mutually exclusive code can be on the site when it's ready. You can't ship process is the last thing I'm going to put out there. It doesn't matter whether you're doing Kanban, it doesn't matter whether you're doing agile development, it doesn't matter if you're doing waterfall. None of it is going to make the customers happier. None of them are going to improve your your P&L. None of those are going to have much of any effect on much of anything. So at the end of the day, our job is to create value, is to ship code. So my parting words on this are, don't get bogged down in the process. Focus on shipping value to your customers. And that is me when I was a tiny kid in Sheridan, Wyoming. I liked building things even back then. So my Twitter handle is @JoeStump, and I think we're going to do question and answer now.
Ahorita. Okay. Well, we can do. ¿Podemos hacer un Q&A?
Just take a seat, Joe. Thank you very much. Please, let's say applause. Well, what about if we talk for a little bit and then we open up for Q&A?
That works.
Your background is very interesting because you started as a software engineering development, and then at one point you decided to start your own company. And I believe that was
SimpleGeo.
SimpleGeo. So why start a startup? And it seems like a simple question, but I'm pretty sure that most people don't really think about it. And some people think, oh, it's because I will have 100% control of my time. I'm going to be my own boss. And then I might become a millionaire, which they're all kind of like not really true, right?
I might be in the NBA too someday, but
Yeah.
as far as my reasoning goes, I think to start answering your question, everybody's different. Everybody's reasons are different, but I think those reasons fall into a couple of big buckets. One of them is the carpetbaggers that you talked about, where they see it as an opportunity to make a lot of money, right? And they don't really care about technology. They don't care about design. They're just like, give me those dollars. And unfortunately, the growth in the startup ecosystem and the growth of technology as a dominating sector has led to an increase in those types of folks. There are a lot more of those types of folks these days starting startups. I think that there's the other one is the independents, right? They're the people who are like, I think I can do this better. I want to be able to set my own schedule. I don't want to have a boss, which is, by the way, if you start a startup and get funded, the notion that you don't have a boss is laughable, because there are people that wrote you checks.
Yeah.
And they want a return on their investment, and they install this thing called a board of directors on top of you that can fire you. So you have a boss. It's just a much more complicated and indirect relationship than a boss is. There are definitely those folks out there that are just like, I want my own company because this is more of an independent streak. And then I think the third camp is there is something that doesn't exist in the world, and I believe firmly and deeply that it needs to exist in the world. And as far as my reasoning goes, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs, it was probably a little bit of all three. I was living in San Francisco at the time, working at Digg, and it is shocking how easy it is to raise money there. I had a buddy, originally from Africa, went to University of Arkansas and Stanford, and he got his first investment from the chief of legal guy at Facebook. The guy wrote him a $500,000 personal check at Starbucks and said, "Send me the paperwork later." So that first bucket, when you're in a place like San Francisco and you've lived in New York and London, the money, it can be egregious how quickly money flows in between hands in those places. And then I had worked at so many dysfunctional startups at that point that I really felt that starting a company and hiring engineers and doing tech right was something that was very appealing to me. And then the third bit was definitely there were some things that didn't exist. Mobile had just come out, and I had been interested in just geography and whatnot for a long time. And I had been doing, funnily, it was SimpleGeo started out as a gaming, augmented reality gaming company. So it was like, basically we were making Pokemon Go before that was a thing. Far too long before that was a thing. And as we were developing it, I went to my founder and I'm like, you have no idea, this data, you can't get anywhere. There wasn't, Google Maps barely had an API. It had a web API and had the iOS API, but they didn't have some of the more sophisticated things that you'd want to do. Like you couldn't get weather data necessarily easily, etc. And that was the difficulty that we had in getting that data and having it be accessible. Geolocation data, this was a decade ago now almost, was locked up in places like Navtech. Like when I called up Navtech and I was like, hey Navtech, I want a geocoder. And a geocoder is something that takes an address and converts it to a latitude and longitude. He said, the guy at Navtech said, that's $175,000 up front, and then another $175,000 every year, plus a per query fee. So every time I looked up an address, I would have to pay them as well. And I was like, hey Matt, we need another round of funding just to pay Navtech for this stupid geocoder. So that was, I guess those are my reasons. I think most people are a little bit of both, or a little bit of all three, but.
Yeah, and then the hardest part, like how do you build a team? Like you need to, usually, I don't know, there are some single founders, but usually it's an extra co-founder or two co-founders. And then how do you build that engineering team with that business team? Like maybe if you can share some of your experience, because you founded 3 companies already, so you've had this process still going on at least 3 times.
Yeah, so with a couple of things on recruiting engineers. One, if you're the business founder, so usually, I will say on founding a company, if you're going to be a person that goes out and founds a company, God bless you, find somebody who is opposite of whatever you do. So if you're a developer, go find a business person. If you're a business person, go find a developer. Because you're going to need each other. That's one. One, you're going to need each other. And 2, it offers, I think, a balance that 2 developers starting a company or 2 business people starting a company, if you're a developer and if you're a maker and a manager, to use broad terms, you can divide and conquer. But if you're both makers or both managers, you have immediately started off with effectively all of your fingers in the same pie. You're both going to try to do the same things. And I don't know about you, but in early days when I'm working with somebody who wants to do the things that I'm very good at, friction can arise. So that's the first thing I would say about finding a founder. Find an opposite. As far as recruiting engineers go, once you have your technical co-founder, have them do the recruiting. They know where the engineers are, they know how to pitch the engineers, and they know how to recruit them. And the reason that I say that is I still get recruiting emails, which I think is funny because I haven't programmed full-time in a long time. And these recruiters will say things like, we have these investors, or we're working in this field, or other things that most engineers don't care about. What engineers care about is, what is the cool tech I get to build today? There are a lot of engineers out there, I know a lot of engineers out there, that they don't care at all what kind of, within some reasonable parameters, they don't care at all what kind of product they're building. They're like, do I get to use Terraform and Packer today? Awesome. No, they literally don't care at all what's happening up above in the real world above them. And being able to pitch a developer, there's some things that business folks, like we have a ping pong table in the office, we have a kegerator, those things are whatever, but the developers are the only ones in your company that can speak the way that the developers can speak, and can pitch them on that, And when I think back to the things that's attracted me to startups, it's been excellent engineers. I want to work with great engineers. I want to learn from great engineers, and I want to learn new technology. One of the reasons that I love tech so much is because we're governed by Moore's Law, which is every 18 months computing power doubles in halves and costs. And what that means for us developers in the room is that about every 18 to 36 months, everything I've learned is now obviated and useless. So I spent a whole bunch of time, and the developers in the room might giggle about this. I spent a whole bunch of time learning a library called jQuery. Nobody uses jQuery anymore. Cool. Like, I mean, it's still on the web and it's still deployed, but like, so I think for recruiting the engineers, the things that has always attracted me is, am I using the latest, greatest stuff? I don't want to write COBOL. I don't want to write COBOL. I don't want to write jQuery anymore. I want to write React. I want to do React Native. I don't want to work on actual servers anymore. Why would I rack and stack servers when I can spin them up with a credit card on Amazon? And there's a bunch of really cool tooling around that now. Those are the things that you should be pitching to the engineers when you want to recruit the good engineers. You want to be saying things like, we're working on difficult technical problems. We're using the latest and greatest technology. We invest heavily in automation and testing. These are the things that the developers care about. What they don't care about is who you raise money from. They don't really care about the business side for the most part, and that tends to be what the business people pitch.
Yeah, and both the attachments and the SimpleGeo, you raise money.
All three I did.
And the first one I think was like 10 million. The second was like 2.5. Like, when do you decide, like, let's go and pitch? And I know you lose a lot of time, and that's normal, and you lose focus because you're not focusing on, like, building the product and going to market. You're actually talking to a bunch of people to write you checks.
Yeah.
How was that process? What do you recommend?
I recommend not doing it if you can. I don't know where this quote came from, but it goes along the lines of, like, your best investors are your customers. So that'll lead with that immediately. If you can avoid taking money, avoid taking money. That being said, you can't bootstrap a rocket ship, right? Like, so I think the decision of when to fund or not to fund is largely around barriers to entry, I would say, and that's everything from what are my barriers to entering this company all the way up to what are our barriers to entering the market. We were building, with SimpleGeo, we were building infrastructure as a service effectively. I needed smart engineers. Our Amazon bill was many tens of thousands of dollars a month, et cetera. I couldn't bootstrap that. Attachments Not Me was a simple product. We actually had a full-blown working prototype, full-blown, when they went and invested, or when they went and got investment. Started that with a couple other guys. And that decision was more centered around not building the product, but taking it to market. They knew that they were going to need to hire marketing, designers, spend money on marketing, that kind of stuff. So I think the decision of when to raise funding is largely around, funding is an accelerant, right? If you think about it, like, so the time that you want to take and go and get funding is you're like, oh, I have a spark or a small fire, and I want to make it a giant bonfire, and I want that to happen right now. So, the reasons to take funding are to get over those barriers and then also to compress timeframes. So the reasons that I would nod yes on raising funding are you doing something that is very capital, intensive? So you're not going to, like, Tesla, SpaceX, build rockets and cars cheap. Like, you can't MVP a car. That would absolutely be a reason to go raise funding. If you notice an opportunity in a market, but there's a shelf life, there's only a certain amount of time that you can execute to take advantage of that market opportunity, that's another reason to do that, to take funding. Another reason to take funding is, this sounds so simple, but I remember there was a company a long time ago that, I even forget the name of it now, but they basically were an Outlook plugin. They were an Outlook email plugin. They got sold to Yahoo for a bunch of money, but they had just raised $25 million. And I was like, we shared an investor, and I was like, walk me through this. They sell box software at Best Buy for Outlook, and they just raised $25 million. And he goes, they figured out how to turn $1 into $5. They'd figured out their funnel to where $1 equaled $5 in LTV. And he goes, you know how you make 25 million $5 bills? I was like, you go get 25 million $1 bills. So that's another reason to raise capital. When you have a funnel metric to the point where you know that you spend $1 on your funnel and it makes more than $1, that's another reason to go get funding, right?
Yeah.
And then the last reason that I will never question a founder on going and getting funding that I've seen often, not often, but a handful of times, Threadless is a good example of this. They built a business that was making a truckload of cash, and then somebody that had an even bigger truckload of cash said, hey, I want some of your truckload of cash. Here's a big pile of money. So taking money off the table is always a perfectly fine reason to raise money as well.
Yeah. And in your case, those first two, SimpleGeo and attachments, you actually sold them. Like, why did you sell them? Like, didn't you want to build like a unicorn? Like, or at what point do you say, look, this is as far as I go.
Yeah.
I got a good offer. Let's sell and move on.
There's a whole bunch of reasons why that might be the case. In the case of SimpleGeo, I will say selling is again a personal decision, right? There are a number of really good reasons to sell and a number of terrible reasons to sell. The reasons that we sold Attachments.me and SimpleGeo was, in Attachments.me case, there just wasn't enough of a market there. And in the case of SimpleGeo, people weren't ready. I don't know if anybody here knows about the Ford Edsel, but it was a car that was made in the early 50s, I think, and it had things like power windows and air conditioning and power locks. And literally the entire market was like, I just roll down my window. Why do I need a motor to do that? It was too soon. And if you look, I mean, there's still videos on YouTube of us doing augmented reality like a decade ago. And if you look now, Pokemon Go came out 2 years ago, a year and a half, 2 years ago, and it's hugely phenomenal. The market was not ready for the technology that we were building. Like, we were getting calls from like political campaigns that wanted to geocode addresses and stuff, very basic stuff, and we were offering a Ford Edsel. So those are the reasons that we were, one of them was the market just wasn't there and wasn't big enough, and then the other one, the market wasn't ready for what we were offering.
And I think I saw a video of you saying, like, what type of investor should you look for? I think you mentioned one, like, your customer would be great because he's going to pay to invest, and then he's going to be your customer.
And he gets no equity. Things that I look for in an investor are, there's a whole bunch of reasons to take a check from somebody. Maybe they know the market really well. Maybe they have skills that you do not have. If you are a designer and a developer that doesn't know a whole lot about business or marketing, it might make sense to take a $25,000 check from somebody that's a VP of marketing, for instance. Network is always a reason to take money. You know, the Rolodex that an investor comes with does have value. They will always overstate that value, but it does have value at the end of the day. I think strategic investment is always something that can be interesting. The problem there is you got to make sure not to poke the bear too hard. So a strategic investment might be when a very large company puts an investment into a much smaller company because they're doing something interesting in that larger company's space. So a strategic investment might be Visa putting money into Square way back in the day, right? And the reason that I would do that as a founder is if I'm doing a payments network and Visa comes to me and says, hey, I want to throw a little bit of money in, I'm probably going to get a much better rate on the Visa network access. I'm going to be able to escalate problems that my company and engineers have with that particular company much more quickly. There is a reverse side of that, though, and the reverse side of that is as soon as that strategic investor, which really it should be called larger competitor investor, because that's mostly what they are, is they're your bigger competitors, they get access, and they get a lot of access. Sometimes they get board seats. And there was a company that I don't even know if I guess I'm outside of my NDA at this point. Urban Airship, the company that bought SimpleGeo, took strategic investment from Salesforce. And at the time, we were doing a bunch of push notification marketing, lifecycle campaign-y stuff. And they made that investment, and it wasn't, and I'm sure they had talks about acquisition, et cetera, et cetera. And then they bought ExactTarget, which was one of Urban Airship's primary competitors. So I would say there's, that comes with a lot more perils than just taking normal investment. So at the end of the day, things I look for in an investor, great network, they know things that I don't know, and access. This is the last thing that I will point out. When you find an investor, make sure there's someone who is accessible. I have taken money from investors that literally they wrote a check and I never talked to them again. That added money to my bank account, but it didn't add any other value beyond that.
And then you've also done the other way around. Like you've invested in a few companies. Like what do you look for in a startup? Like is it the team? Is it the product? Is it a combination of several things?
So I have invested in precisely 3 companies. One of them was Yard Sale, which was basically a mobile Craigslist. One of them is a company called Keep, which does mobile advertising. They're actually pretty big now. They do and they do a very interesting version of that where they basically do you redeem rewards. So as a game developer, or they even have like MyFitnessPal and other things like that. As you achieve goals, you get these rewards, and that one was, I thought the product was basically just genius. Mobile advertising was, particularly at the time, I think this was in 2010, it's terrible. Teeny tiny little banners across the bottom, pop-ups, that kind of stuff. And Brian came to me, Brian Wong, and he said, I think I can build a better mousetrap. And that mousetrap was, there's a whole marketing area in marketing called sampling, where companies actually pay marketing companies to hand out free samples. And they pay them X dollars per sample to hand these things out. So if you're, if you have a new shampoo coming out, not something I use very much of, but if you have it coming out, you'll give out a whole bunch of samples. And usually the way that we've all seen this is the people that walk around the bar with the free shots. There's a new liquor that came out, and they walk around, right? Like the Jaeger girls or whatever. They're giving out free samples. So Brian basically went to the brands and he said, I'm going to give out your free samples through apps. And then he went to app developers and said, hey, your users can get actual free samples of stuff in app when they beat a new level, or when they like level up and beat the big boss or whatever. And I was like, this makes like so much sense, because you're effectively connecting those advertisers directly to the customers, right? And the customer actually gets something, and they're getting an actual reward during a time when that dopamine hit is already happening, which is they've just beat a level, or they've just finished a 5-mile run, or whatever that might be. The third one I invested in was a company called StyleSeat, and StyleSeat does booking and basically is a back office product for health and beauty professionals. And that was a very personal investment. My mom is a hairdresser, and I know how underserved that space was, and I had a lot of confidence that Melody could deliver. And I made that investment largely in honor of my mom. So
cool. So once you give money or once you receive money, like how would you spend that money? Because some startups go like, oh, let's get like a crazy Google type office and all these perks. Like, how would you feel like, oh, those founders that I invested in are actually spending the money correctly?
I actually polled a whole bunch of investor friends, and I wrote a whole blog post about this, of how investors expected you to spend money. Right off the bat, if you're spending less than half of your burn on people, that's a red flag. The vast majority of your money should be going to people. I'm a fan of remote work. I don't care if you have an office, but it would be a huge red flag if you were spending a high percentage of your burn on an office. So the vast majority of the money should be spent on people, because people who are what is going to take your product to market. They're the ones that are going to make your product and take it to market. So I would say even anything less than probably 60-70% would be concerning to me. If you're not spending a very high percentage, people.
Okay. So just before we open up for Q&A, any things you want to recommend to people that either want to invest or people that are actually entrepreneurs or want to be entrepreneurs? Like, what are your like 3-4 things you want to like?
On the investment side, my approach to investment, particularly early stage investment, is I don't expect a return. And I know that sounds really screwed up, but so early on, when you're literally looking at two people in a conference room that they have a pitch deck and a half-baked prototype, you can't honestly be looking at that and being like, well, what's the EBITDA on this thing? And, how much is your LTV? They don't have any of that. So that's really the first hurdle you're going to have to get over, I think, as an investor. There are a lot of places in the States where startup ecosystems are just starting to come up, and the initial investors are the people in that area that have a lot of excess capital, and that almost always breaks down to people that own manufacturing things and people that do real estate. And those two things are probably the most regulated, mechanized method of making money on the planet. Like, it's very straightforward to figure out how much you're going to make money from a rental. Like, there are canned Excel spreadsheets out there. There are not canned Excel spreadsheets out there for the next Facebook and the next Google. As far as the entrepreneurs go, I have a lot more thoughts there. The first thing is you need to have a very, very high tolerance for stress, and that includes stress from your partner, who's going to be yelling at you about coming home late and about not pulling your weight at home and not making enough money. It's going to be stress from your employees who think that you're not building the right thing at the right time for the right person, and maybe you're not paying them enough and that they want more equity. You're going to have stress from your investors who are going to think that maybe you're not doing the right things in the right order. And you're going to have stress from your customers who are telling you that the latest thing you shipped is shit. You're going to have stress from your co-founder, you're going to have all sorts of arguments about them about every single topic under the sun. So if you're the type of person who gets stressed out while they're waiting in line, or if you're the type of person that just can't handle those stressful situations, you're going to be very uncomfortable as an entrepreneur. There's one of the Facebook guys, Sean something or another, said entrepreneurs have to like chewing glass. That resonates with me quite a bit on the stress side. The other thing I will say, if you're going into entrepreneurship, is make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. If you're just looking for an exit and to make a lot of money, there are a whole bunch of easier, less stressful ways to make a lot of money than winging a prayer, which is effectively what a tech startup is. And the last thing I will say, that if you're going to be an entrepreneur, focus on the things that you know. It's very difficult to build big businesses in sectors that you don't know a whole lot about. Find things that you care about. Find things that you care about so much that you think there are huge portions of that thing that are shitty and could be better. And that's where your opportunity lies, is the things that are crappy and could be better. So that's, I think, about it.
Yeah, that sums it up. Okay, so we'll have 15 minutes of Q&A. ¿Preguntas?
Hello, Joe. My name is Piero.
Hi.
I'm in charge of the projects in my mobile app company. You talk a lot about wireframes, but in my opinion, I don't really like them. They give a lot of power to the UX designer and give a little room for the visual designer. You can change your mind once the wireframe is set in stone. I think they will make getting things signed off easier for your client. But the problem is that you can change something that you sign off. I mean, what's your opinion about this? I mean, what's your opinion about wireframes, right? Nowadays, there's a lot of tools that can make them really good, right?
Yeah, there are a ton of rapid prototyping tools, and that, I think these days I would focus, well, first of all, why do I like wireframing? It's because I'm terrible at Photoshop. And I have a picture up here, and I can't make it in Photoshop, but I'm really good with wireframing. So I use them as a method to communicate with my designers about what I want them to do. These days, though, I skip that step entirely because we have so many great prototyping and UX libraries. So these days, I probably wouldn't recommend a wireframe so much unless you need to communicate those ideas. So here's a couple of ways that I have used wireframes successfully in the past. I've done it to communicate with designers, particularly remote designers, because we can't sit at a whiteboard where I scribble on it. I've actually sent wireframes, so when you get to a point where you're like, oh, I know I need to build this thing, but you're not exactly sure how the customer wants it implemented, I'll do a few quick wireframes of a few options and send those to a couple of customers that I collaborate with to get their quick feedback on before I go back to the team. But yeah, to your point, I think these days I would be doing, I like to backfill actual design. So if I was going to be building big products from scratch today, I would be having my developers prototype a clickable, usable prototype using something like Bootstrap or something like that. I don't know if that was helpful. I'm sorry. Got one up here. Fancy red shoes.
Joe, I really like the different reasons why people create startups, and I completely agree that it's a lot of people just getting in it instead of selling shoes or real estate from 20 years ago. If you could elaborate more on, I love the one for wanting to see something exist, right? And the reason I ask that is, if you look at maybe the last 5 unicorns, right, that have come from like New Relic to Twilio to Stripe and even Slack, the word solution isn't going to show up anywhere in their communication because they're more along the lines of just creating, and other people are doing what they want with that. Well, what's your opinion upon? Do you think it's a movement? Do you think it's a temporary thing that they're not even focused on solving problems, but more just elevating technology?
I'm going to try and say that back to you, which is a lot of the latest unicorns were things that were willed into existence. Do I think that's I think at the end of the day, those types of startups will always be the ones that end up as unicorns. I think that it's very difficult. I'm struggling to even think of a unicorn where the person was one of those carpetbaggers, where they were just somebody that saw something else and ripped it off and went after it, right? If you look at things like Lyft is actually, I think, a really fun example where the original founders, actually, they started out as a company called Zimride, and it was one of the first recipients of the FB Fund Award when that was a thing, and they did social ride sharing. That was Lyft was a pivot, but it was a pivot based on something that they had been doing for years and had been successful doing, and it was something that they were very passionate about, which was connecting people to other people to provide cheap, accessible transportation. Uber has a much more convoluted, different founding story, but it really came from, the initial idea was Garrett Camp, who founded StumbleUpon, wanted to be able to hit a button and have a car come. And their original plan, no joke, when they built that thing out, was to just share it with their buddies. Let's all pitch in on a black car and just have it around whenever we want it. And so I don't think, I just don't see it, and I don't ever expect somebody to come out and say, I don't care about the tech, I don't care about the product, all I know is there's an opportunity here, because those are always the first people that quit. So. Fancy red shirt now.
You talked about testing in the first part. How popular, how established is test-driven development in your working environment? Because it's not much here between developers.
Yeah, I don't consider code done until it's tested. Mm-hmm. And the reason that I don't consider code done unless it's tested, so first of all, I'm going to differentiate. Test-driven development is where you write the tests first, which is the expected behavior, and then you backfill the code. I would say that's still not super common, depending on what people are doing. Now, going back writing tests, absolutely.
Wait, sorry.
I'm cutting out. I would say they may not write the tests first, but they do always write the tests. So that testing your code in general is a very accepted, common, normal practice in the States and in a lot of parts of Europe. And the reason I don't consider code done.
Using like automated testing.
Yeah, yeah. So just as an example, Sprintly has about 3,000 unit tests that cover front end, back end, browser tests, the whole 9 yards. The company I work at now probably has 5,000 to 7,000 tests on their product. They've invested heavily in doing unit tests on both the front end and the back end, as well as doing integration tests through a browser framework, like Selenium being the primary one these days. And the reason why I think that it, again, is so important is because I like to tell my developers, all code is crappy, it's just a matter of when it becomes crappy. Like code rots, it has a half-life. This is for the business folks in the room. Code, just like this building and just like everything else, erodes over time. It becomes less useful and less, it just erodes. So the reason that tests are so important in those cases is things like we have a new library that we're introducing, or we're doing a major upgrade on a library that we use everywhere. If you don't have tests, like broad test coverage, and you upgrade from Rails 4 to Rails 5, you're effectively driving that airplane without any kind of, your windshield's basically blacked over. You have no idea what could possibly go wrong if you don't have that proper test coverage.
Thank you.
Hi, yo.
Hi.
I have a question about which is your advice for this topic. You said that we should analyze many features before we start and start up. But sometimes, as you have seen in our society, we are not like a modern society yet, if you compare it with other countries. No? So, in your opinion, which kind of startup is the best for us? We should do something to fit in our society model right now, or we should change or do a startup that disrupt the model of our society?
I would do the startups that make the most sense for where you're at. So, and really when it comes to kind of finding the right startup for kind of, well, I'm gonna tell you a story first. When I worked at SimpleGeo, I had a guy come to me that was doing a startup in sub-Saharan Africa, which is a place that I think is probably more rural and less modern than Peru is by a long shot. And the startup that he was working on was, he had a very interesting problem, and I unfortunately could not help him in any way, shape, or form, was he had created an SMS gateway. This is 8-9 years ago, there were not a lot of actual smartphones in sub-Saharan Africa. Everybody still had the Nokia candy bar phones, right? And so he created an SMS gateway that allowed these farmers to text the type of seed they needed for farming. And it didn't give them driving directions because there's not a lot of roads in sub-Saharan Africa. It gave them walking directions to the nearest seed depot. So this was something that he did that was very low tech as far as Western worlds go, but it was something that was needed in his home market, was implemented with technology, and solved the problem. So I think the answer to your question just goes back to what are the problems that can be solved here, and do you have the raw ingredients to solve that problem with the solution that you're going after? So I don't think that I would recommend to the next Peruvian startup that they go out and do something like SpaceX. They should be looking for something that can provide a lot more value and be a lot more applicable to their home markets, I think. And if that, and if there could be, I was just talking earlier about a startup that did something, and this is something that I think Latin America should take to heart, is you're a very large landmass market, and it's not easy and accessible to large American companies. So this company got bought by Fandango because they had effectively done what Fandango couldn't do in Latin America. So I wouldn't shy away from solving problems that have already been solved, because they've probably already been solved elsewhere in different markets that won't translate to this market. And part of the reason why they have not been solved in this market is because the people in the United States don't understand the markets down here. So I'd keep it local, and I wouldn't have any shame whatsoever in doing things that have already been done if you think you can do it the Peruvian way and deliver value here.